Today I'm going to show you my very first cook on the Old Country Barbecue Pits Pecos, which I must say didn't go so great. There's a bit of a learning curve, and I probably added to that. But before I get into the cook, I wanted to show you a few things that I did or tried to do to improve this cooker and address some issues that I discussed or pointed out on my first video. For one, this thing definitely needed a gasket. So I picked up some fire black gasket from Lava Lock, which I installed on the underside of the cook chamber door. And I gotta say, it did help, but there are some gaps inside the cooker, inside the door, top and bottom, where the heat and smoke are still coming out. I'm not sure how I can address this issue, either with some more gasket or some RTV sealant, but it needs to be addressed. Speaking of sealant, I had some RTV 450 left over from a mod I did on my WSM, so I used that to seal the hole in the weld between the cook chamber and the firebox. Seems to be working and holding nicely. I also bought a 3-inch Tel-Tru analog thermometer with a 4-inch stem that I planned on just installing in the pre-drilled hole above the door handle in the cook chamber, but for some reason it would only screw in about halfway. I'm not sure what the problem is specifically, but I think it is the thermometer. So either I'll drill the hole out, move it somewhere else, or just get a completely different analog thermometer. But I tried. Oh, and lastly, I added a drip bucket. This little guy is actually made by Traeger. It's very nice, has disposable inserts. So that's what I've done so far. Now, if you watched my first video, you know that I bought this thing for brisket. But I didn't want to just jump into a 12 or 14 hour cook with a $60 prime brisket and mess it up. So I figured I would do 1 or 2 cooks lasting a couple hours. That way I could learn the cooker and not really screw too much up. So if you guessed that I was doing ribs today for the very first cook, you guessed right. I'm doing 2 racks of baby backs from Smithfield with some Cosmo Q's Honey Chipotle Killer Bee. We're also going to use his smoky sauce at the end. Now for fuel, I started with a chimney of B&B lump charcoal, put a lid of oak on there, had all the doors wide open just to establish a nice coal bed. Now for the sole source of fuel today, I'm using a bag of B&B cherry splits. Going with Jeremy Yoder's recommendation, I decided to add a water pan over the coals in the firebox, and I'm not so sure about this idea. Yeah, the steam might add some moisture into the cook chamber, and it may help regulate temps, but I also know that the transfer of energy from a liquid into a gas, the water into steam, will require more fuel to sustain that transfer of energy. So you're going to use a lot more fuel. I don't know if I'll do this again, but I did it anyways. So there you go. Once I had a bed of coals, I put on a cherry split. Once it caught, I closed down the cook chamber door, the firebox lid, and left the fuel door open. This seemed to settle the cooker in very nicely, and it wasn't blowing out a lot of white smoke. Now I left the fuel door open the entire cook, which may have led to me burning way more fuel than necessary and might have caused too much airflow. I don't know, but that's how I decided to run it. Now, from my understanding, talking to owners of Brazos and Pecos, without diffuser plates, there's basically 3 zones in the cook chamber. High in the center, medium range in the right, and the left by the stack is a low range heat. Now, I don't know what the differences are specifically, but I know that's kind of how it operates from my understanding now. So I'm going to cook today on the low side because that's where I would put a brisket. Now, I gotta say, this thing ran pretty smoothly. Of course, there were ups and downs and swings in temperatures, but it kind of stayed pretty much between 225 and 275, putting a split on maybe every 30 minutes or so. I thought to myself, this isn't that hard. This probably was my downfall. I got a little overconfident and thought I could just run an errand. I put a split on, left the house, and when I got back, the pit temp was around 160 something, and the coals were almost completely out. Now, the bark had set, and they had good color, so I figured I would wrap them, retain the heat that was present, restart the pit, and get it rolling again. After an hour in the wrap, I could tell by feel and bend that these weren't done. After an hour and a half, I could tell they still weren't done. We probably weren't having ribs for dinner, so I better fire up the kettle and make some burgers. I just let them finish unwrapped. I continued to cook them. I actually increased the pit temp. Total cook time to finish was almost 7.5 hours. Totally ridiculous. I wasn't only just frustrated, I was honestly really a bit confused. Now, I know that I screwed up by leaving the house. That caused the pit temp to drop, so I probably lost some time there. But even if I lost an hour, we're still looking at 6.5 hours, which is too long. Baby should take 3 to 5. So this was really confusing to me. Now, the ribs had good flavor. They were dark due to overexposure of smoke. and they were a little dry, probably because of the long cook time. But they weren't anything like mind-blowing. But I can't say that like offset is any better, any worse than any sort of cooker that would be cooking with lump or something similar, because obviously this was not your average cook. It was a long cook time. Now I realized I could have scrapped this entire video and saved myself some embarrassment, but I'm here to learn something, and maybe you are too. If there are other channels out there that just tell you, hey, this is the perfect way to do this, the perfect way to do that, that's not me. If I know something, I'll tell you. If I don't, I'll share that too. That way, someone else might learn from my mistakes. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Feel free to comment and let me know what you think. And if you have any tips for me, feel free to leave them down below. As always, thanks for watching.